Welcome, everybody. You watch Stargazer. Now on to Sunset Power Rankings. It's the PBO preseason. You gotta love it. And I'm here, of course, with two of the best Sunset analysts who are also in their div, Don
What's up?
and Syracuse.
Welcome to the Thunderdome.
I'll make sure to add something there. Don, I'll throw it to you to start off with number 14, and he's not uncomfortable in this spot.
All right. So before we get too far into this, I just want to say these rankings are completely divorced from the player's skill. This is just a team analysis. That being said, I think this team is having a pretty big identity crisis. You have Deoxys Speed, which is a really good enabler of offense. You have Clodsire and Alamomola, which are like a stall core. You have Rabombi, which is there to facilitate Webb's hyper offense for things that like aren't that crazy fast. You have Indeedee for Psychic Terrain, exactly one abuser being the Deoxys Speed. You have Blaziken, which is like a decent enough recipient of like the screens, spikes, Deoxys Speed sets up in Clodsire. You have Roaring Moon, which like it's a good Pokemon, but it really appreciates having something to break fairies for it. The Poison and the Steel in this team are Clodsire, right? So they're not really doing a whole lot of fairy break. The team is like, it's really passive in some regards, and it's a bit too aggro. Those two sides of the team are very separate from one another. And I think it's going to make it very hard for this team to, like, get to an end game, you know? I think, like... one thing I do like, I really like the Terrathundi. Terrathundi is a certified demon. But something I think that's, like, kind of interesting about it, kind of a drawback of it, having used it myself, is that Terra Thunderous, all of the Terra that it likes to use tend to have, like, a pretty massive drawback. Like, Flying and Ice are the two biggest ones, and they're both weak to rocks, so you kind of feel locked into boots sometimes. Water loses a lot of offensive utility. Ground makes you kind of unable to hit grasses. A bunch of Ogre Ponds or, like, Levitating Dragons around. It can kind of be really annoying. All of the common Terra types likes to run. The hazard control is pretty great, though. You got Corviknight to defog things away. You got Brambleghast to spin, even though I think Brambleghast is pretty bad. What do you think, Syracuse?
I agree with what you said. It's kind of got this weird identity crisis. I mean, this is a very, very strong defensive core, just including like, Corviknight, Alomomola, Clodsire. If you don't have a way to punch through these, you're going to have a rough time. But as you said beforehand, what is he going to do to finish those endgame scenarios are going to be what? DD, Roaring Moon, Swords Dance, Blaziken, Nasty Plot, Thunder Tea. Stuff that you're just going to, that's going to happen every single week. So it becomes a little bit easier to prep against. You know what are his win cons. And if you eliminate those win cons, then, what's he going to do from there besides just maybe stall out? This is a team that you kind of know when you're prepping for it. I think you know what you're going to prep for each set exactly. There's nothing really here to have any kind of like surprise factor. There's nothing here that you got to worry about. Is it going to be offensive? Is it going to be defensive? The only thing that might be flexible is Deoxys Speed. That way you can abuse the Psychic Terrain a bit. But overall, like you said at the start of this video, it's not indicative of anyone's play style. We're just going based on team-wise. Overall, I'm looking at this team, and it's going to be one that you can easily prep for, and you're not going to be really surprised by anything. Just wondering what Sixties are going to bring every week. And as you're going to see with a lot of these teams as we're going forward, only having 2 Terra slots makes those Terra slots so much more valuable. And even though like the Thundi T is amazing, I do put a question mark on the Terra Clodsire just because it could be something else that could be taking advantage of that slot that's so vital. Um, but otherwise, this is just a team that, on paper, you know what's coming, you know what everything's gonna do, and that's about that. I have not much else to add besides what you've already said. It's he last season he got one of the lower ranked teams at the start and pleasantly surprised us all and got out of Neon. Maybe he could do it again here.
Yeah, I think if we're looking on ways to improve, I think what this team could do is maybe lean a bit more into that psychic terrain mode. Like if you drop the Bramblegast, get rid of the Terra points on Clodsire, you could get something really Terra. And Terra Hawlucha can be a massive threat in most games that will happen. And then at the same time, you'll have some brought to the. But yeah, with that, I think we can move on to our number 13 spot. And number 13, we got the Mew World Order. You want to start this one out, Syracuse?
Mew World Order.
The Mew World Order.
Besides being one of the best team names I've ever seen, I feel like this team, once again, has a similar kind of like identity crisis as we're going to see with some of these lower teams. You got obviously Dragapult, which being I think this was second or first pick overall. They did some swappy nonsense, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to take it first overall. So kind of pigeonholes you into that, which is like the downside of being one of the first picks is like you got to take like the best mon on the board. I mean, Dragapult is the best mon in draft, I would argue, just because it could do so much. But then you got things like Glimmora, Non-Terra Kingambit, Terra Dirge, Terra Wattrel, which are like, Terra Wattrel's, if you're gonna bring Wattrel, you're gonna want to Terra it. But as we're going to say more than once here, those Terra slots are so valuable that like you kind of almost want other things to have it. Not Non-Terra or Porygon Z kind of hurts a bit. Fur, it's kind of like whatever, making this team like a 10 mon team. You're not going to be bringing that fur at all. Hatterene's kind of like, I feel very kind of mixed about it. Like it's a mon that's like not really doing too much. I almost feel like Gardevoir and Hatterene both are in that kind of like weird spot, but almost like Gardevoir is better. Hurt is another one of those mons where it's like good, but also like it's kind of fallen off as time has gone on. And Heracross being another one of those mons that really would want to take advantage of that Terra system. I just feel overall like the punch power of this team is kind of lacking, and a lot of mons are more about like more value. I think this is like a team of like value mons versus like any kind of synergy. I feel like you could probably input a little bit more into that kind of like nitty-gritty stuff, Don.
Yeah. So I think this team kind of just struggles because it doesn't really have something that it's building around, which is crazy to say when you have like the best mon on the team. But that's kind of the thing about Pult is it's not something you build around, something that enables you to build around the rest of your team. But you start with like the best facilitator in the format, and then your next pick is Glimmora, which is good offensively, don't get me wrong, but it's primarily used as like support. It's a hazard guy, it's a mortal spinner. It'll do the meteor beam stuff maybe a couple times a season. And so you're getting these guys and you're like, okay, we're building towards a really nasty offensive core here. And then that gets followed up with non-Terra Kingambit, which will let clear Terra Kingambit is banned, but it's worth noting that it's not Terra. And once that guy hits the field, it all just kind of it falls flat a bit. And then the next pick being Terra Dirge. Terra Dirge I think is good, but it's not going to be able to handle the defensive role on a team very well because it's still a Dirge. Sure, it can Terra Fairy and have great defense and just set up, but it's not really taking of the kind of support that Drag as effectively as some other. And then Ogerpon Teal is like, anyone who knows me knows I'm a massive Ogerpon hater. But with Ogerpon Teal in particular, especially without Terra, because this season, I think it's really going to fall flat. Because the thing about Ogerpon Teal compared to the other is having no secondary stab really makes it vulnerable to a lot of common. It struggles with any flying type. It struggles with most steel types and dragon types. Because believe it or not, the boost that you get from the mask is a really impactful boost. And so without having that boost, it's really going to struggle to keep up in this kind of a format, I think. It's good as a spiker, as like a leech seeder and a pivot, but offensively, it's just kind of lacking a little bit. Hatterene's kind of similar in that regard. Like, it wants to be a fat fairy, but having 50 HP, or like 52, or whatever it has, really lets it down. I think as Ben puts it pretty often, its best set is probably like Trick Room Life, 3 attacks. Swampert, I think, is good. Heracross is a really good example that I think, in my opinion, is kind of functionally used, at least in like a modern day. Kilowattrel's good. I have no complaints about Kilowattrel. Very good Terra Cat. A spam Terra. Porygon Z is another guy that, well, I don't think it's useless without Terra. I think the only adaptability Pokemon actually really benefit from Terra. Getting that second stab with the normal type in particular, being able to be like a special Digger's normal is really strong. Not having that here, kind of disappointing for it, but it still has good coverage. It's a Porygon, like basically Gen 1. It comes from Porygon. And then there's Furt, which is a meme. But like one thing I'd like to point out about this team is like, when you imagine a team with 9 like full point Pokemon and then a 10-point Pokemon to like make a bare minimum number of Mons, you expect the team to look a bit more powerful on paper than this. Like a top heavy team like that, you expect it to be a bit stronger. And this team is just like, if you had told me that this team had a 10-point Mon and had like the rest of the budget was this, I would assume there would be points left over, but there's not points left over. So that's just kind of where this team. You have anything else you want to add, Syracuse?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just one of those teams where it just for a team that would be so heavy on points, looking at it, nothing else is above 160 except for Dirge, but you got so many Mons there in like the 110, 120 range that aren't really doing a whole lot. There are a lot of, when you get to that point range, you get a lot of Mons that are, quality Mons, but it's just they're not enough to punch through that hole or be tanky enough. And I feel like that's what this team is lacking. It's lacking in the punch as well as the tankiness to do a lot of things, a lot of pivots. You got a lot of Mons that just kind of are there. And I agree with like Heracross as it's kind of whatever, even though I love my boy. As the generations have gone on, it's gotten less and less effective, and I'm interested to see what they could potentially maybe make out of it. But yeah, I just agree. Overall, for how many points are left over, which they actually do have 10 points, so that Furt can be something of value potentially in the 20-point category, or if you want to swap something else. I'm not sure what though at this point, but it just lacks that overall flair that you'd want from many of its members.
All right, and with that, I think we're good to move on to our number 12 spot, the Scarborough Sceptiles. This was last season's semi-finalist placement. Could have made it to finals. He was one of the favorites to win the whole thing. But this season, I think his team, at least on paper, is a bit worse than it was last season. For example, last season he had Spectrier to build around, and then he got Dragapult after that somehow because no one wanted Dragapult. And now he went from having basically 2 of the best Mons in the format together to having one of the least flashy Pokemon to build around, like especially as like a round in Meowscarada. And then he really wanted to use Terra Necrozma, so even though he knew it wasn't like an opt round 2 pick, he just grabbed it because he wanted it. And like I can respect that. I respect the hustle. I did the same thing. But I worry it's just not enough offense on this team. Or not even that it's not enough offense. Like if you look at his offense, it's like the first 4 and then Infernape. And every single one of those guys is pretty free. So it's going to be about like turn from is a really good slow pivot, but it's not going to be able to carry the whole team on back, especially when it needs to stay healthy in scary things like Baxcalibur or Kyurem or Bundle or other guys, things like that. It just makes me worried about getting a lot of these guys on the field safely. I also kind of wonder why Regieleki is here, especially when Rotom Heat is here, because let's put it like this. Regieleki, in my opinion, is probably one of the best spinners in the format, just because it forces a switch to a ground type, and the only ground types that are immune to spin are Palossand and Golurk. And so it can just get a spin against 99% of teams really freely. Past that, since every team has a ground type, all it really does is get screens up, and boom, maybe it volt switches once or twice. But you have Rotom Heat, which can volt switch and get screens up. So I feel like Regieleki might be, especially because like 200 speed it's never like actually gonna. Grafaiai is an never ended up fitting on the team. I just never came to a game. Quagsire is okay, but I feel like it's better when the team feels like it's at risk of being set up against, which I'm weak against. Ice-Cue's a shitter, it happened. But I think the big thing worth Terra. Necrozma and Landorus are very good Terra captains, but together they kind of fall victim to something we're going to power in so far that when you have 2 top-tier Terra captains, you can only bring 1 to a game. And so if you spent, I think that Landorus cost in total 180 points with Terra, and now you have to bring it every game, but every game you're leaving 30 points of it on the team is built around the Necrozma. And this team isn't like the worst example of it because non-Terra Landorus, do not get it twisted. That guy is great. But by virtue of having these 2 high-tier Terra, which like you have to in draft, but when it could have gone towards something that doesn't being left as much, then it can be better. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I got to say about this team. What do you think, Syracuse?
Looking at this team, I think one of the glaring things is, as you've kind of like touched base upon, is that top 6 versus those bottom 5. I'm looking at most of those mons besides Regieleki, like and Rotom Heat kind of doing the same thing. Like when is he actually going to bring Grafaiai or Quagsire or Ice-Cube? I'm just looking at these mons and I'm wondering if he can potentially cut one of them. Maybe cut Quagsire and Ice-Cube and maybe get another 90 pointer, or Ice-Cube and Grafaiai get maybe another 70 pointer that he might use. But just looking at this team, I see the glaring weakness of just being like, top heavy with those first 6, and then what else? Maybe he might swap out 1 or 2 for Regieleki, but otherwise he's going to be bringing those same 6 almost every single week. He kind of has to bring Empoleon, otherwise he has a glaring ice weakness with a lot of his mons. Because otherwise your only other ice resist is Ice-Cube and Rotom Heat. I mean, like you said, Rotom Heat can be that other 6 mon besides Regieleki that might be coming in and out. But otherwise, Empoleon's going to be coming almost every week because of that. And just defensively, it just kind of feels a little lackluster. Your defensive core is Empoleon and land OT, I guess. Or I even mentioned in previous video doing something crazy like AV and Amorous or something like that. But otherwise, defensive-wise, this team is going to be taking quite a beating. Because you got Meowscarada, you got Necrozma, you got Infernape. None of these guys really can take multiple hits. You might be able to do something funky with Necrozma that I'm not aware of. But other than that, it's going to be, lacking defensively, which kind of was his theme a little bit last season, where he was like a more all offensive team, all out offense. But this team just doesn't do that same kind of all out offense that he did last season, and I feel like he might struggle going throughout the season dealing with that, just not having the offensive power without having enough defensive power to back it up either. I can see, like I said, I'd just like to see maybe a few transactions, moving some of these lower point mons around that you're probably not going to be bringing, or just doing something else with these bottom mons that you could probably get down to 10 mons and have a little bit more value. Otherwise than that, like you said, Lando T is nasty. I'd maybe like to see it swap off of Terra, because that's another 30 points that you can have go towards something else, because you're probably not tearing it over Necrozma. Meowscarada is always a good mon. I think as the seasons have gone on, we have seen it kind of like fallen a little bit. As a first round, it's still good, but as we're going to touch base in some of these later teams, some really good mons that should have been picked up in the first round didn't, and got dropped down to like the third and fourth in some cases. And I'd like to see that, there was those other mons that are on the board that could have been potentially even a little bit better than Meowscarada. But Geo does have a lot of, tricks up his sleeve, so it'll be fun to see what he can do. And like I said, this team might be one we might see change a few times a little bit before the transaction period's cut off. But that's about it on my end.
All right. Let's move on to our number 11 team, the Toronto Staraptors.
Cut it.
All right, so first thing about the Toronto Staraptors, you stole my Gholdengo, you filthy whore. I'm just kidding. But
yeah, fuck
team,
you, Toronto.
Very much. I love you, man. But that hurt me during the draft process. I was like, well, time to rebuild the entire team again. This team, first pick Sneasler, second pick Gholdengo, third pick Excadrill, fourth pick Hydrapple. I'm starting to get a little confused here. The biggest issue I see with this team is synergy wise. It's like it's got really good Terra captains. Terra Hydrapple's nasty. Terra Harkonine, really good as well. So you got some really strong Terra captains here that I think are slept on without having to spend crazy amount of points on them. But just looking at this team, big ground weakness, because you got both Gholdengo and Excadrill. Hydrapple's your like big resist, but he's also tearing out of potential resisting as well. And then you got Manaphy, and then Staraptors, you're an immunity, but I don't know how often you're gonna be bringing Staraptor. So you got a big ground weakness going into this team, especially with those first three picks. You just, none of them are really there to take a hit. Even with the berry, you're probably not lasting more than two. But you do have really strong offensive power in both Sneasler and Gholdengo and Excadrill. You have a lot of setup and sweep potential with this team. So you do have that, but otherwise, I think, looking at this team, looking at those like last four picks, Umbreon's kind of like whatever. Staraptors, a non-factor. Whimsicott can be good. It does kind of like to Terra a little bit more, but it still doesn't have to. But it's the issue with Whimsicott is like it doesn't do enough per se. It can do some nasty things with the Prankster, Leech Seed, and can bring out some surprising sets. It's got Moonblast, so it is a good fairy type in that aspect. But otherwise, you're just looking at a team that's just mostly trying to set up. You got the Talglow Manaphy, you got Nasty Plot Dango, Swords Dance Sneasler, Swords Dance Excadrill. I think Hydrapple also can get Nasty Plot, but you're not really sweeping per se much with Hydrapple. but you got a team that's mostly going to be trying to catch off people with sweeping potential. You got screens there. You got Screamtail there to try and support, but otherwise, I'd like to see a little bit more synergy. You have people that could abuse terrain in Sneasler. You could have sand with Excadrill. Not saying that they're not bad without it. It's just lacking a lot of synergy, I think, per se. But it's got some of the stronger Terra captains we've seen in terms of like value-wise up to this point. But otherwise, it's kind of, I feel like this team is a little one note and expecting just a lot of setup. And just kind of having a lot of glaring weaknesses in that per se. You do have a lot of ways to deal with hazards though. I mean, you got 2 steals, you got a grounded fairy. You're not going to be dealing with hazards too much. But otherwise than that, the defensive prowess of this team is a little lacking as well. Like I said, you got Hydrapple, which is good, and Screamtail, but otherwise in that, and you can do defensive Goldango as well, but then you're losing one of your sweepers and heavy hitters. It's a team that you could flex a few things on, but overall, I'm just a little worried about some of these glaring weaknesses. Don, do you have anything you want to touch base on?
Yeah, a little bit. So the thing about the top 3 is I think it's really interesting because all 3 of them thrive on a specific kind of team style. Like, they're all known for certain kinds of team styles. Sneasler is known for terrain, whether it be grassy or psychic, but there's no terrain on this team. Goldango is the best spin blocker in the game, but you don't have any spikes to set up. Excadrill has built-in sand attacks, but we don't have any sand on this team. And, like, all of those are fine. Like, I think Unburdened Sneasler's overrated. I personally prefer Poison Touch most games. Goldango obviously doesn't need to be spin blocking to be getting value. And Excadrill is a really good ground because Sneasler really appreciates having ground types on its side, or good ground types hit those poison types. So overall, it's not like they have anti-synergy together. It's just they're not getting their maximum value. Terra Hydrapple is a demon, especially because now it's open Terra. Last season it was restricted Terra, and it was still really good. I really like having multiple screen setters in Goldango and Screamtail to help out the guys like Sneasler, Manaphy, Hydrapple, even Goldango, because like if Goldango isn't the screen setter and it's Screamtail instead, then Goldango is free to like do really awesome nasty plot stuff. I think Umbreon has passivity issues. It's a bit easy to set up on sometimes. Like if you set up a sub in front of Umbreon and you like resist foul play, the game can just end. Like I've done that before. And so sometimes it can be really tough with Umbreon. And like you can say, well, Toronto has an Unawaremon in Crocolore, but Crocolore is not a real Pokemon. That guy's not coming to games. I think Staraptor is it's a mascot pick, but it's kind of an expensive mascot pick. It's like 50 points, so like it's not the end of the world, but it's 50 points that could definitely be going towards something else. Whimsicott's cool. Prankster Encore will always have a niche. But like it's also not quite fat enough to take those ground type hits that Syracuse was talking about a second ago. So like, yeah, ground. If you tear your Hydrapple and Whimsicott didn't come to the game, a Moxie Crocodile wins the game on the spot. Like there's just no chance. So yeah, I think this team compared to the others, I think it definitely has a lot more working in its favor. But there are still some pretty notable flaws, in my opinion. You have anything else you want to talk about, Syracuse?
I'm just currently looking at the 50-point tier to see like what else could be there besides like the mascot pick of Staraptor. And you got, potentially Yanmega, which could be that ground immunity. You got Lurantis.
Lurantis could be really good, actually. I think.
You got Hisuian, Decidueye. Just looking at things that could be that like ground resist as well. But otherwise than that, it's better in terms of like some of the other teams we've seen on paper. It's good. You're gonna be punching holes with this team. especially with like Sneasler and Goldango and stuff. But just some of those glaring weaknesses, and like you said, there's a lot like those first 3 mons you want. Like it just feels weird that they were drafted like that because it's like there's the things that normally go with them aren't with this team, and it just feels odd.
All right,
And that's
and with that, I think we can move on to our what is it now? Number
10.
9 team.
10.
Is it 10?
10.
It is 10. Our number 10 team, the Clonbrook Kyorgres. Now this is our first Sun team in the Sunset Division.
first weather team.
First weather team, even, yes. But the thing about this Sun team is it's not really a Sun team. It has Torkoal and it has Venusaur, and it has like Cinderace, I guess. And past that, there's like no Sun synergy here.
No, there's actually anti-synergy with Scizor.
Sure, but that guy was always dying to a fire move anyways.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the real anti-synergy on this team is the Slowking. That guy clicks Chilly Reception, and you just undid all the hard work your Torkoal did of getting in and out safely. And so now you have your Snow up, and okay, yeah, wow, Mamoswine takes less damage from physical hits, but now your Terra Venusaur needs to get repositioned all over again. I think Zapdos is probably okay on this team. It just pivots around.
Yeah, its Hurricanes get hurt a little bit with the sun, but it's like whatever. If you're resorting to Hurricane, then you're already kind of like 50-50ing it anyway.
Yeah. Round 1 Darkrai is really interesting. Arguably bad. But like, I am of the opinion that Darkrai shouldn't be on Fraud Watch because people just don't know how to use it right. People treat it like a breaker when I think it's at its best when it's a cleaner. Like I see so many people just lead Darkrai and expect it to do something to just destroy every 80 base power stab move. Clonbrook, if you're watching this, I beg of you, please don't just lead Darkrai and click Hypnosis and expect it to do something. Like, 40% of the time you'll be throwing it away, and the other 60% of the time they'll find a way to play. So, you can find ways to get value out of Darkrai that don't involve just throwing it away in the early game. Honestly, in my opinion, the most interesting part of this roster is the Terra Como. Not because I think it's like this insanely broken threat, like it's insanely broken meta threat, but because no one's used it in the PBO in like forever. And it has Terra this season, and it's been uncomplexed, so it can just do the Clangorous Soul, Throat Spray, Terra Normal Boom Burst stuff. It can become a defensive Terra, it can be like Belly Drum, it can be Bulk Up, it can be Swords Dance, it can be Iron Press, it can be Rocks, it can be Special, it can do so much stuff. I really think Como is a Terra Captain with all that versatility it's got, most of which is in the setup variety, but it still has a lot of like not setup stuff that is worth using. I think that makes it a really valuable Terra Captain. I think non-Terra Alchemy is kind of a waste of points. It's not entirely a waste of points, but like it's a lot harder to use that way. But overall, I think what this team struggles with the most is not having some like core big strong guy to build around and like go towards an end game with. Like I just spent all this time talking about Como because that's as close as we got. And if Terra Como is the closest thing you got to a big bad scary guy, then the team's in trouble. Do you have anything to add on to that, Syracuse?
I guess like what else is your other cleaner besides I guess maybe like Venusaur? Try to take advantage of the Terra like Weather Ball, maybe Terra Fire. But otherwise than that, like you said, it's got hole punchers, but it doesn't have that big cannon. Obviously, you got Cinderace there; it's gonna be taking chunks out. Darkrai that can take a chunk out, but nothing that's gonna be like one-shotting things. Nothing crazy like like a Spectre or Spec Shadow Ball that's just gonna kill whatever that comes out. You got a lot of mons that are just kind of like good on paper. You got Darkrai, Cinderace, Zapdos, Scizor, all fantastic mons in of its own right, but there's nothing really synergizing them. It's kind of a team of just like a lot of decent tools, but nothing that like comes together that you can see a clear picture of. So it's gonna be more about based on like his individual play rather than the team's ability to synergize with each other, which is there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes having a more a multifaceted tool is better than having like one specific kind of play style. You know, he doesn't really have any mons that are going to be useless, like some of the other teams we've seen that are like, you know, we clearly know like the 10-point mons aren't coming, or like Staraptors not coming for Toronto. The only thing that might not come is maybe Alcremie, but even then, like, you could still find uses for it in specific matchups. But everything on this team is going to come, I believe, at least once this entire season. So it's probably one of the first teams to actually do that successfully. But otherwise than that, it's nothing that's going to be like flashy. You know, nothing that like I'm team building against and I'm like, oh, I got specifically team build against this one specific thing. There's nothing on that team that on this team that really stands out. And like you said, the anti synergy of not Glowking, just regular Slowking and Torkoal. You know, you don't want to click Chili if you're bringing Torkoal as well with the Sun, unless you're going back into Torkoal. But at that point, like, you know, what is Slowking not able to tank that Torkoal can tank? That you're clicking that reception anyway, and most of the time when you're clicking Chili, you're wanting to go into something that's gonna, you know, revenge kill or give pressure. Torkoal's not really that thing that's giving pressure, so just like you said earlier, that anti-synergy just feels a little weird. I wonder if you can maybe like swap out something. Looking at it right now, Alcremie is how many points?
30, I think.
30, so I don't think there's really anything in the 30 tier that can take advantage of any kind of more weather per se. Yeah, if it was like 50 more points, I would say go with like a Lowland Sandslash. Then you can at least take some advantage of the snow, but otherwise the only other thing that can maybe take advantage of the Sun is maybe like Lilligant, or yeah, that's about it in terms of like the 30-point tier. But I think that's about that if we want to move on to the next team.
All right. The next team, our number 9 team this time, is going to be the New York Nickits.
Our second, the real Sun team.
Yeah, the other Sun team. Now this one's got a lot more instant punch to it than the previous team. Terra Chi-Yu. Some people say it's like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Like, Terra doesn't matter on Chi-Yu. It's fine without it. I think Terra makes a big impact on this guy, especially on like Terra Dark sets, because I think it combines some of the best aspects of its 3 most common sets, being Scarf, Specs, and Boots. Because like it lets you run Scarf while having almost the amount of powers of Specs, while also not being as afraid of rocks. And now, if you're Terra Dark on a Sun team, now both of your stabs are being boosted into the stratosphere, and they kind of just have to pick which one they're sacking onto, basically. Not to mention, there are also just the funny calcs of Specs, Terrafire, Chi-Yu, and the Sun. Overheat does like 80% or something. Terra Walking Wake is also really freaking strong. It's probably going to see more instant value per game than Chi-Yu will. Like those two on their own are immediately like making this a better Sun. They're also the only two, and like sure there's Slither, but it's not really. Like, so Slitherwing is kind of just a Sun abuser, but it's also here as like a ground resist, because Serena can't. I guess Serena and Skarm do fine at it, so I guess it's not really. It's there as a Sun guy. But I think Slitherwing's stab combination tends to just really be lackluster. Because I think, if I remember correctly, bug fighting on its own is walled by either 4 or 5 individual types. So it just makes it really tough for bug fighting. It does get Flare Blitz, which is good for the Sun. It can Willow and Morning Sun pivot and do that stuff and do the first impression stuff. I don't know. Like, it's not bad. I'm just not. personally a fan of Slitherwing Sun, but like I'm sure it has merit, and I'm sure Clefable's all right in Sun. Like it's definitely not bad. I worry that for the things it's trying to check now, EST isn't enough. But it's also like only 130, probably okay. Serena is here for spin and a ground resist. It's like that's what it's doing. Boulder is kind of interesting. Without Terra, it's significantly worse, but I think it's still usable. People say it's just a booster speed merchant, but I think banded sets and like life orb sets have more viability than it's given credit for. But again, without Terra, it's gonna struggle with that really atrocious defensive typing. Charger Bug is not coming. Ninetales is there, and then the last two are where it kind of gets like you have all these guys that are trying to facilitate, and like Boulder's there too, I guess. But then you get to Ursaluna Slowbro, and it's like, why are the last 2 months here just here for Trick Room? Like that's all they're here for. Slowbro is like here as total fire, but it's not a very good one because like it's not that Spadef bulky. So if it's taking like a Sun boost thrower, it's probably, and that's assuming it's not specs. Ursaluna is a really good mon, but like I'm not sure it quite fits on Sun. Like there's not a whole lot that's like trying Ursaluna here. It kind of needs a lot of support, but okay, it usually needs a lot of support unless right here. So basically, all that's here for it is Trick Room Slowbro, and then the rest of the team is pretty fast. So like if you get up Trick Room and they play around your Ursaluna, like they get it out off, the rest of your offensive guys are too fast for it. Like you have one guy to take advantage of Trick Room. Slowbro's like, okay. It doesn't have the chili reception anti-synergy that Slowking has. Like that also means it can't pivot out, so it gets stuck on the field. So if you get Trick Room up with it, then you have to hard switch to Ursaluna, or you have to hard switch to something else, and it can kind of just get set up on that. It's really hard. Like it can throw out D-Waves, that's nice. It gets good coverage. It can slack off, but that's pretty much it. You have anything to say about this one, Syracuse?
I'm glad you brought up the Ursaluna Slowbro thing, because immediately that's the first thing I notice is like, this is a relatively fast team between like, Boulder, Chiyu, Ninetales, all decently fast mons. Where like, so the Trick Room is really what benefiting Slowbro, Ursaluna, maybe Min Speed, Slitherwing, and then like Clefable. But otherwise, like you got like some anti-synergy going there, which is a little funky. I don't really see like how Ursaluna is gonna sweep otherwise, and then like what else are you bringing it for besides to like maybe set up rocks, I guess. But otherwise, like it's kind of a mon that's just there to play more towards that play style. I'm interested to see like week to week which is he going to choose to Terra more, if it's going to be the Chiyu or the Walking Wake. I feel like almost like in some matchups that Terraing the Chiyu is kind of redundant. So maybe he'll be able to Terra the Walking Wake a little bit more effectively. Chiyu is kind of one of those mons where it's just like, where the Terra, it does hurt even more, but it's like it was already going to one-shot anyway, so like why does it matter? I think like, he has to bring Zarina almost every week, I've noticed though, because like no real other hazard removal. He kind of gets a little dinged up by rocks. So he wants to make sure that stays away. No grounded poison either, so he's gonna be a big very susceptible to like T-spikes and stuff like that. So he's kind of like forced to bring Boots Serena almost every week, which kind of like anytime you're kind of like forced to bring him on every week, it limits your team building, because otherwise in that like he's gonna be very susceptible to those T-spikes that Ursaluna doesn't want to deal with, Slowbro doesn't want to deal with, Walking Wake definitely doesn't want to deal with. So it's kind of a little bit struggling in that point. But but this is probably one of the first teams where on our list that like I'm truly afraid of, like how am I going to deal with this Chiyu, like just punching a hole through my team, and its speed tiers are pretty decent as well. So you gotta deal with that as well. this is probably the first team on our list where it's like, all right, now I gotta like figure out the puzzle of how
Gotta
to
lock
play
in and
against
prep
this.
for this.
Gotta lock in. But we'll see. And that's about that on my end. If we want to go on to the next one.
All right. Next team on the list, our number 8 spot, goes to the Pittsburgh Scizors, our third consecutive weather team. It's also the last one, I believe, so don't worry.
Weather teams are mid.
Weather
Teams are mid.
teams are mid. The council has spoken.
But this is probably the scariest weather team that goes full balls to the walls weather.
In Sunset, absolutely. First pick, Terra Urshifu Rapid. It's one of those guys that, like, it doesn't need the rain, but it sure as shit appreciates it. And, like, it's the same philosophy as Ben's Palafin up in Stargazer. He also has a rain team, with his top pick being a strong water type that doesn't need rain. It works the same here. We might see a lot of Scarf Terra Water Urshifu being spammed, maybe like a bulk up or SD pad set, or rather punching glove. Garchomp is a really good pair for this because on a rain team, you need an electric immunity, and Garchomp is like probably one of the best out there. Iron Crown's really good because you also need an ice resist, or is that a fairy resist? Sorry, not ice resist. But when your first two are Urshifu Rapid and Garchomp, you kind of need a good fairy resist, right? Ice too, that it is important. But I think fairy's a bit more, like that's a bit more operative as to why Crown is here. Crown is definitely very good. It can feel a little bit weak sometimes if you're running like some of those support sets with like Assault Vest and like the fast pivot sets. But it's still really good regardless. And then we get to Terra Raikou. I love Terra Raikou. I think it's slept on, but I know it's not going to come very often because there's a whole Terra Urshifu there. Sylveon's fine. Pelipper's like mandatory. Overquill is your standard Swift swimmer. Porygon 2 is interesting because it it's like I don't really see what it brings to a rain team. But the thing about Porygon 2 is like it's never bad on a team. It's usually really good at like providing some sort of synergy to a team, like patching a really blatant hole or something like that. I just don't see what Porygon 2 is doing in that regard on this team. Now I imagine it'll do great because it's a Porygon 2. That guy's phenomenal. But like, yeah, I'm not going to keep repeating myself. Tornadus is like fine. It's a really cheap Hurricane spammer. It's like 50 points this season, I think. So you just pick that up, you bring it maybe a couple games where you come against some really flying weak teams. You just spam Specs Hurricane and then clean with something. Like, it's easy as that. Galvantula, I think, is really just a bit unnecessary on this team. You have 2 Swift swimmers. You have a guy that loves running Scarf. You have a Scale Shot or a booster speed guy. Do you really need webs? And, like, this is a Thunder spammer who doesn't need rain to click Thunder. It's got, like, 97% accurate Thunders. And then Basculegion, the second Swift swimmer I mentioned. Yeah, it's there. This is, like, your very standard rain team. You got a Thunder spammer, Hurricane spammer, Water Stab spammers, and a backup Swift swimmer. Only change I would recommend is get rid of the Galvantula. Maybe get rid of the Terra on Raikou. Get rid of Raikou altogether. Different. And like get another backup. Maybe even Terra the Overquill. I've never used Rain, so I guess maybe some of those changes. But the one thing I am positive about is a bit redundant. Or not even redundant, just unnecessary. What do you think, Syracuse?
I think, like, touching base on the Galvantula, I feel like, like you said, it's kind of redundant. It's not really taking, it's already has Compound Eye, so it's not taking advantage of the 100% accuracy from Thunder. I mean, it is, but it's also, like, unnecessary. This team's already so crazy fast that, like, what's Web's doing anyway? You're going to outspeed 90% of the time anyway. What are you trying to get your Sylveon to outspeed? I guess that's about it. Or your Garchomp, maybe. But it's just like this team's outspeeding everything. Galvantula's 60 points. Maybe you can grab something from that tier that's still available. Oricorio maybe might fit with this. That way you have another Hurricane abuser, but that might be a little overkill since you already have Tornadus and Pelipper. But just like, just a thought. You already have the 2 Swift Swimmers, Basculegion, Overquill, and like I believe probably this Basculation is going to be probably the female variant more than the male variant for most weeks. I want to say, just because you already have the physical Swift Swimmer Overquill and the physical Rapid Strike. So I gotta imagine this is gonna be more of the special variant that's gonna be coming out that you gotta deal with, like Swift Swim Shadow Balls coming and hitting your way. Tornadus at 50 points, I believe, is just an incredible steal. It does so much and brings, can bring support, bring offense. For 50 points, that's insane. I agree, Porygon's just kind of like there, but it's also like such a good value mon anyway at 70 points. That's like, why not? I don't know how often he's gonna bring it, but it's just, those two picks just work really, really well. This is probably the only team that probably didn't get sniped at all throughout the entire draft, and you clearly see a plan in place with every single pick at every single position. He got almost everything he wanted, and I feel like this is just a really well overall drafted team. Obviously, the glaring issues is with most weather teams is you're always going to have weaknesses here and there. I don't really see. He doesn't have a spinner, correct, or any way to remove hazards.
Oh, that's right. We did mention that. Yeah, he doesn't have any hazard.
Yeah, his only hazard removal is Overquill to remove T-Spikes, but otherwise, he's going to be having to run a lot of boots. None of these guys really want to deal with rocks and spikes too often, especially Tornadus and Pelipper definitely don't want to be dealing with rocks too much. And depending on what you're tearing, your Raikou, it's not going to want to deal with that stuff either. So he's going to have big issues dealing with this hazards. Let's just hope that his like offensive pressure can just outwit that. It's just like, cool, I took 15% damage, but I got Swift Swims and I'm going to outspeed you and kill you anyway, so it doesn't matter. But that's probably the biggest glaring weakness holding this team back is like it's just very weak to hazards because it's got no way to remove them otherwise. So, going into most matches, if someone just suicide leads and sets a bunch of hazards, he's going to be just struggling with that all match. But besides that, I do like this team in terms of like, has a mission, had a goal, he got everything he wanted. Maybe he can swap out that Galvantula. I hate to say like grab I believe, what was it, Fortress is 60 points, but Fortress is also bad, but it would be a spinner that you could have. So
one thing we did talk about before recording this was that Archaludon is still on the board and is allowed to Terra. So if you drop the Galvantula and the Raikou, I think it gives you like just enough points for to get that Terra Archaludon still fall the 10 mon requirement. So I think if you just do that, team gets instantly like twice as good because Terra Archaludon is a menace.
Yeah, that would leave him with 20 extra points as well. Because that gets him 200 points. Terra Archaludon is would be 180. So that would let you have 20 points to just grab something that might make a difference. Illumise and Volbeat are down in 20. Something. Morpeko is a rapid spinner. Down in 20. Hitmonchan is also a rapid spinner down in 20. So there's some moves that you could do here. I think this team overall is good, but if you got that Archaludon, man, oh man, am I going to be scared.
All right, we're going to move on to our number 17. Officially top half. Congratulations. Only took like an hour and a half. But number 17 is the Birmingham Buizels. This team round one Terra Mew. And in my opinion, this team is the number one example in this division of a team where drafting two top-tier Terra captains is a massive downside. Because if we look at it, we have Terra Mew, we have Terra Ceruledge, two insane threats. But if I Terra my Mew this game, I can't bring Terra Ceruledge. And both of these threats feel very dependent on Terra. And which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you spent so many guys that ideally, because I'm not wording this very well, but a lot of the rest of the team, because you spent that many points on these Terra guys, are kind of these lower tier guys like like Pheasant, Cyclizar, Superior. Like the rest of your team is feeling this impact, and you can't even bring both of your top tier guys every week. And so a team like this just kind of feels like it's getting left behind some of the others in terms of straight power level. But it makes up for that by having just a lot of individually good mons anyway. Terra Mew, I think it's kind of slept on. Not so much as like the Dragon Dance that everyone knows about, but I guy almost. With Terra Mew, you can kind of just pick any Terra type you need. 4 good coverage moves, maybe 3, and you can check multiple guys every game that you can kind of struggle. If you just kind of do anything, because it gets unlimited coverage. And sure, it doesn't get recovery anymore, which is really, really unfortunate. It would probably Terra banned if it got recovery. But it's so flexible that like skill piloted to really just soft check anything in the game. Sarah Ledge kind of goes the opposite way, and it sets up and blows teams up because it's fucking unstoppable. And then the rest of the team after that, in my opinion, it's still good. It's just it kind of lacks some oomph. You have Treads, which is like cool. It's a great spinner. There's also Mandibuzz and Cyclizar, so hazards are never getting up against this team. You have Keldeo, which is like a cool round 2 or 3 guy. You have Kyurem, which is a cool round 2 guy. Like basically my biggest gripe with this team is like 5 of these guys all kind of just feel like they're round 2-ish guys, like round 2 or 3, and there's no high tier guy to build. Which is like it's workable. That's generally how I like to play teams. You'll see that in a little bit, but I think this team kind of it feels it a bit more because. But like overall, this team, like Kyurem, Keldeo, is a nasty offense. I think non-Terra Serp is not. Defensively, Mandibuzz, Fez, and Treads gonna be really hard to break. And this team it will win a lot of games. Like I'd be kind of surprised if this team won anything less than like 4-4 or 5-3. Not that this is a record projection. But anyways, what do you think, Syracuse?
I think Kyurem lasting that long in the draft and being this late of a pick is absolutely atrocious.
Very
and
true.
The fact that and as we get later on with some of these other teams, you're gonna see that like the fact that so many of these great picks were so late in the draft, as I said earlier in this video, got through, hurts me in different kind of ways. And the fact that seeing Kyurem being this low picked is utterly insane. Like the amount of value he got for such a late pick is absolutely absurd. As you mentioned earlier, this team is not dealing with hazards. You're just not getting them there. You got Treads, probably one of the best rapid spinners. You got Psych, you got Mandibuzz. You're not getting hazards up, my friends. I'm sorry. So he doesn't really have to worry about that too much. He's got Terrace, Ruledge, and Kyurem, which are going to be like his big punchers. But otherwise than that, like, you got Serp, which is like whatever, especially when it's not Terra. It's like you kind of know what Superior is going to be doing. Glare, Leaf Storm, kind of nonsense. Keldeo, that kind of early on must be just more of like a comfort pick. Like Keldeo is a great mon. I don't know if it's like a third round pick worth, but like you can get a lot of value out of it. I just say looking at the Kyurem, which was round 9. I'm just like the fact that Kyrem's 9 and Keldeo's 3 kind of hurts me, but it is a good mon. Can do a lot of different things with it. I feel like we said prior to this video that it does kind of like lack a little bit of the offensive power that can like punch holes through your teams. You do have kind of Mandibuzz and Fezzidipity, which kind of play similar roles. Otherwise than that, like he doesn't have to deal with hazards. The biggest issue is just kind of having too much of a good thing, which is 2 really good Terra captains. The value of the Terra slot is so important this season, and having 2 slots taken up by 2 really good mons is not necessarily a bad thing. It just hurts sometimes when you're spending that many points and not being able to use that Terra captain that week. Like if he's going to be bringing Ceruledge, you're probably not bringing Terra Mew, which means Mew's probably being more of a defensive piece, or just kind of doing the DD Psychic Fangs kind of thing. But then if you're not bringing Terra, if you're not tearing the Ceruledge, you're probably not bringing him at all. Which you might, I don't, you could, normal Ceruledge still is kind of nasty, but to spend that many points, I think it's 70 points to have him as Terra, kind of pigeonholes you in wanting to use it. Yeah, that's going to be 180 points total. But otherwise than that, this is overall a good team. It's bringing it up the top half of our teams on boards. It's nothing too shiny, but it's got some insane pieces, insane values that can easily win them games.
All right, we're gonna move on to our number 6 team, the Cherry Hill Bellsprouts. Now
So
this team,
No, go ahead.
this team is it's good. Like you can just look at it, the top 6 are like really solid. But honestly, in my opinion, once you start looking at it, you can kind of see some holes in it, especially in the aspect of like type overlap. You have 2 grounds, you have 3 waters, you have 2 grasses,
3 poisons.
but you have 1 steel. Yeah, 2 poisons.
No, 3
So, like,
poisons.
3 poisons. So yeah, there's a lot of type overlap. But then you have 1 steel, and it's your best Terra guy. So now all of a sudden, like a lot of those important types that Steel's trying to resist, like Psychic actually kind of runs through this team of Wochian. Non-Terra Wochian, while fun, is not a Pokemon you can bring all the time. This team can also be kind of ice weak a bit. Not too ice weak. Like Bundle doesn't really count as ice resistance, Wochian hard on anything. Washtum has its issues. Araquanid won't be coming every game. Yeah, I think
a lot of free freeze dries.
Yeah, freeze dry absolutely runs this, but thankfully, Cherry Hill has the best freeze dryer in the. Tusk is definitely going to be very good on this team. Flying moves do also kind of run through this. If Heatran, flying moves really run this team. I also really dislike, okay, let me put it like this. I have used a team where Bundle and Rotom were my only 2 waters before. And yes, while I understand Araquanid is there too, it's not coming down. Having Bundle and Rotom be your 2 main waters feels so terrible. Every time you want to click a water move, you're like praying that you won't miss, and spoiler alert, you're gonna miss. So like both of these guys never want to click their water stab unless they absolutely have to. And it makes it really hard sometimes for them to act as offensive waters, if that makes any sense. And another crazy thing about this team. Bundle is the fastest mon on, and that's like fine. The second fastest mon on the team is the Landorus. That's not great either. Like 136 to 101 is that's a lot of ground. If I have anything above like 110, 115, I'm running Modest or Adamant. Even the 110 are like they're getting away with a lot. It's just it's tough. I don't know. What do you think, Syracuse?
As you said, like as you stare at this team more and more, you see more glaring issues, and I feel like if it wasn't for the power that is some of those early picks like Bundle, Terra, Heatran, Tusk, this team would be a lot lower. But because these mons on paper are just so powerful in of themselves, it kind of holds this team up higher than like it should with a lot of these typing overlaps. I mean, he does have one of the best rapid spinners in Great Tusk, and he does have enough. He has three grounded poisons. I guess 2 if you're doing levitate, geezing, but so you don't have to worry about T-spikes too much. But at the same point, like, hazards aren't the biggest deal for this team, but otherwise, like, what are you doing if you're missing the hydro pump on both wash and bundle? It kind of really pigeonholes in that, like, do you really want to be taking that risk? And also tearing Heatran's defensive typings do so much for this team that it hurts to Terra him out of those typings, because then, like, you kind of set yourself up to being swept. So he might be struggling to, holding that tearing till like late in the match, or he might be tearing Okidogi instead. But then once again, as we've said, like in a few other these teams, like if you're not tearing these mons, you're not getting the value out of like the points you spend. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword of like you tear a Heatran to like do the nasty things that Terra Heatran can do, but then you lose that like your only resist for a lot of these other things that you like, especially like this, like you said, the psychic, with all these poison types, and then you're leaving it up to Wo-Chien to be that defensive piece instead, and you're not going to want to bring that every week, especially as non-Terra. But otherwise than that, this team has those scary pieces. Just those glaring flaws just become an issue as you stare at, so it becomes this kind of like hard to put it in a ranking system when it's got such strengths but also such weaknesses as well. Kind of becoming that glass cannon team, not in the fact that like it's all fragile, but the fact that like its strengths are strong and its weaknesses are even weaker. So it's just like hard to put it, so it ends up in this spot.
All right, we're gonna move on to our number 5 team, the Sydney Sylveons. Now, I just want to look at these top 5.
This is a 5-mod team.
Yeah, this is a 5-mon team right here. This is probably one of the best. I say one of the best top 5s because we'll see a team later that has the best top 5 I've ever. But this is one of the best top 5s I've ever seen. Iron Valiant, in my opinion, the number 1 best mon in the format. I think it's better than Dragapult. Disagree. Ogerpon Water, my most hated Pokemon all time, but it's strong. Terra Salamence, one of the strongest Terra Cap. Hisuian Samurott, a tried and true powerhouse. Like no matter the power level, Free Spikes is so insane. Donphan, probably the most cost-effective spinner in the game. Like, if you want to not spend too many points and have a really good spinner, Donphan is your guy. Once we get past that point, things kind of start to fall apart a bit, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because, like, of these last 6 mons, like, 4 of them want to be Terra. Chandelure, if it's not, like, it can do things without Terra for sure, but it really appreciates having Terra, even though, like, triple immunities with its natural typing and ability is very nice. It likes Terra. Revavroom kind of needs Terra. It's why you spend a lot of points for it. Tentacruel doesn't need it, but I feel like you also don't need Tentacruel on this team. You have Ogerpon and Samurott as waters already. You have a Poison in Revavroom, even if it's not Terra all the time. Even if it's Terra a lot of the time. You have a better spinner in Donphan. I just don't think Tentacruel's needed here. Hisuian Avalugg, that guy's pretty ass without Terra. Jolteon, same deal. Pretty ass without Terra. And Uxi's like, okay, it can set up screens for the top 3 guys and be really good at it. It can get Rock Swept, it can knock off, it can U-turn. It can click an Ice Beam. It can do whatever. It can click Encore and Yawn, I think. But yeah, like, basically this team is a team where, like, the top 5 are they are carrying the team on its back. But I think if this team makes a couple transactions, like, maybe gets rid of the Avalugg. Like, you only pick up Hisuian Avalugg if you need a budget spinner and a cheap Terra Captain. You don't need either of those on this team. Tentacruel, you don't need the spinner. You don't need the water type. You don't need the poison type. Get it out of there. Jolteon, that guy's useless without Terra. Get him out of there. Chandelure and Uxie are like, they're fine, I guess, if you really want to keep them. But you could probably upgrade them. But, like, past that, like, the team is, like, it's really close to being, like, oppressively good. What do you think, Syracuse?
So I was just, as you were talking, I was trying to look at what mons could he get for those points, because he has he can cut one mon out and still be enough. Cutting out both Jolteon and Tentacruel does leave him with 130 points, which there's not a lot of 130 point mons left. There's Gyarados, Lycanroc Dust, Thundurus, and Zarude. I don't know if really any of them kind of like fit per se. I'd probably go with more of the Thundurus just because it does do what Jolteon does, but kind of better, obviously. Non-Terra Jolteon, like I said, he's not. It's kind of useless. It's not coming most weeks, I want to say. You know, you don't need the Volt Absorb. You already got Donphan, so it's not like you can't even be like use it for defensive purposes. Uxie brings like screens, so it's like you can't even do that either. Same with Avalug's kind of just, you know, worthless here, so you could probably swap that out. He does have the potential of like getting one more better mon to make this like 6 core even better. Like, you know what the 5 mons he's bringing every week is. It's just that question mark of the 6 mon. Chandelier's kind of like meh. It's such a kind of like mid mon to like not have Terra, but it's like with how valuable the Terra slots are, like I wouldn't Terra this over Reverum or Salamence. It just kind of like gets stuck being that kind of like weird slot that like I just don't see him bringing it too often when like Valiant and Salamence can kind of like just do what it does but better. Terra Reverum, if you know, it's one of those mons that kind of needs it, so it's nice, but it also sucks to like Terra. Anytime you have to Terra out of Steel, it sucks. Because it just Steel typing is just so strong. So that's kind of like the one downside. But then, you know, you Terra that into Flying or something else, and now suddenly like that ground quad ground weakness doesn't become an issue. Especially but when you already have Ogerpon W, you know, or Donphan, like it's not that too big of a deal too much, or even Salamence before it comes Terra. Overall, this is like a really strong top heavy team. If I feel like if you can just clean up the bottom half, this goes from what 5th rank to probably, you know, 3rd or 2nd easily, if you can just clean up that bottom half, because those top 5 are nasty and you know what he's going to bring every week, and even if you know what he's going to bring, it's still going to be painful, it's still going to hurt. So if you got a team that where your opponent knows what you're going to do every week and they still can't do anything, you got a good team. And this is like you said, one of the stronger teams. If you could just clean up that bottom, I think this becomes 2 or 1 in terms of like on paper strength wise.
All right, it's going to bring us to our number 4 team, and wouldn't you know it, it's yours truly. That's my team. I'll let you take the lead on this, Syracuse, and I might make add a few details at the end.
Yeah. I'm not going to say we're biased by putting ourselves in the top 5, spoiler alert, but
Of course not.
But we can't say this is not a really strong team. This is probably one of the other few teams where you will see every single mon brought. There's so many teams that have like 10-point mons or 20-point mons that you know they're not going to bring. This team is going to bring every single mon at some point this season. It's, you know, you got the Gouging Goat himself, Gouging Fire. Obviously, that's just a win con. If you don't have something for it, it's gonna win. You got the Terrapon Cornerstone, which is gonna be nasty. Though it does sometimes suck to Terra out of grass, because now you suddenly become weak to, you know, water. Suddenly become weak to ground. So it kind of hurts there sometimes. But otherwise than that, like you're just hitting those IV cudgels, it's gonna be painful. Petrant is obviously one of the best, just kind of stall mons that can do a bunch of stuff and just becomes a really annoying. Terra Gyapdos, nasty mon, can hurt a lot. You know, and you can never have too many, you know, too many dark types is never really a bad thing. Having 2 dark types that also like don't have the same weaknesses is really nice as well. So Crook does fill out that synergy really well. You know, you got that Moxie Crook that you mentioned earlier that you can just spam Earthquake on the teams if they're not ready or don't have the ability to defend against Earthquake. That just becomes another win con. Metagross, once again, very good mon, has only gotten better in these most recent gens. Probably one of the better steel types that is available for its point total. Noivern's kind of here just to like make that speed tier a little bit better. Primarina is also really nasty. Shaman's kind of like whatever. That'd be like the one thing we like discussed at the video before the video started, is like Shaman can it's kind of there, but I don't know what he's doing per se. besides just being that like grass type that can resist the few things that Ogerpon can't. And Lantern's obviously one of the best value mons. This thing is nasty at just one Stargazer. So it's such insane value that you could do so many different things. So bulky, also doing enough damage. We did mention earlier that this team kind of is a little more physically offensive. You're really only special attackers are going to be Gyarados and Primarina and I guess Noivern, but it's like also Noivern at the same time. So, which is not going to be coming every week per se, but the physical attacking side of this team is the carrying the heavy load. It's bulky without like having a necessarily stall, but it's also got enough offense to punch a hole in many teams. It's got the win cons that you'd want. It's overall a really well built team. Probably one of the more well-built teams. It's just some of the teams above this just are so nasty just because so many nasty picks were able to just picked up in the later rounds that some of the other teams became a little bit more top-heavy on paper. But otherwise than that, this team is an overall just hole puncher that's going to basically be the skill check team. I feel like if you have the skill to be a good Pokemon, be good at Pokemon, you might be able to beat this team. If you're not above a certain level, there's no way you're gonna win against this team. What do you think about your own team, Don?
I do think there are a few legitimate criticisms of my team. First off, being it's very like heavy, and there's not like a really crazy top tier. Some people would say gouging is a good top tier mon, but like the common sentiment is that it's not that, which is fair. But I generally tend to build my in that kind of mid-head kind of fashion. But I think teams like that can be a lot more viable than I think top heavy is kind of boring. And I enjoy drafting a team where I can bring all use all them. But another thing that's kind of an issue with this team is that the only hazard control is Noivern.
I was going to bring that up.
Only hazard control is Noivern, which honestly isn't that big of a deal for anything on the team except for gouging fire. But gouging fire, being weak to rocks, is a pretty big deal on this team. So, yeah, it's kind of an issue sometimes. It might be forced into boots a lot. It might be forced into bringing defog Noivern a lot. I would have liked to have gotten more support for Goltrace, like maybe some screens, maybe some like I don't know, some way to boost this like grassy seed kind of stuff. But I do think the team isn't as weak specially as people think. Like Goltrace is a really good special attacker. I think Petrarunt can definitely do nasty plot stuff. Primarina is really good offensively. People sleep on Shaman. Like Seed Flare, 140 base power grass move, % chance to lower Spidef by 2 inches is a hell of a drug. I think Shaman is a vastly underrated Pokemon, and it has a lot of that it can. Like it can be offensive, it can be Sub-Seeder, it can just be really annoying. I thought it had U-turn when I picked. Turns out I was thinking of Celebi, but I still think he's my guy anyway. Overall, I think the team is like it's a team that's not flashy. Like last season, you called my team a Swiss Army machete. I think this team is kind of like that again. It's a lot of mid-tier guys who can be flexible. Like Crook can be defensive, Metagross can be defensive, Shaman, Primarina, Noivern can all be defensive, Petrarunt can be defensive. Petrarunt is defensive. Gouging can be bulky. But speaking of Petch, I think Petch is kind of like the linchpin of this team because I accidentally didn't get as many pivots as I would have liked. So Petrarunt with Parting Shot is going to be able to position a lot of my scarier setup threats like Cornerstone, Gouging Fire, and Goltrace. He's going to be able to position those guys a lot more effectively than they otherwise would. Especially Cornerstone. Like if Petrarunt Parting Shots on a physical attacker and then goes into Cornerstone who gets the defense boost when tearing, they are pretty much forced to switch and I get a free SD or Trailblazer or a Cudgel or whatever the situation calls for. So basically, I think Petrarunt has good synergy with a lot of the mons on this team. And between like Petch, Primarina, and Shaman, I think it's going to be really hard to like break that kind of core.
Thankfully, you do have two ground immunities, because otherwise this team is very ground weak. So having both Gyapdos and Noivern, as well as Shaman resisting
Yeah.
the ground, is kind of like, that's why Shaman's there. But otherwise, like, the only other glaring weakness is that ground weakness, because you got what, 4 or 5 mons that don't really
Right.
want to eat that earthquake.
Petron 1v1's half the Earthquakers anyways.
Yeah, I mean, Petron's like nasty.
Petron's
but-
him. I would also normally say that it's weak to Fairy, but like between Metagross and Petch, no Fairy's ever
No.
beating it.
No, you're fine on that
Yeah.
aspect.
Sometimes it's not about
Petron's
the number of resists, but it's about the quality of the resists.
besides Glow King, Petron's like the Fairy King, Fairy
Yeah.
Killer.
All right, I think with that, we're going to move on to our number 3 team. I wonder who else it could be. Oh, wow. It's Syracuse.
Woot woot. Like I said, we're definitely not biased.
No bias at all. I don't know why you would ever accuse us of that. All right.
Well, I'll let you talk about my team, Don, because I had a really rough draft building this team, and I'm happy how it turned out. But man, oh man, I felt like I got a lot of sniped bullets through my chest.
Yep, that's the best part of draft. So the first pick was Urshifu Single Strike, which is probably kind of a controversial first pick. Modern day, most people think non-Terra Urshifu is like not what it used to be, even though it did get SD this gen. It really needs a good fairy killer, and would you look at that? Right after picking up Urshifu Single, Syracuse decided to pick up Iron Moth, one of the best fairy killers in the game. Now it is Terra, so it can't like always get those free switches in, but it can at least at first. And then once you look at this, it's like you look at Urshifu and you look at Iron Moth, and you kind of think, well, now the team's kind of ground weak. Urshifu doesn't like fold to an earthquake, but it can't come in on them constantly. And so next comes Rillaboom, and Rillaboom is cool. Rillaboom is really good. Everyone knows this. But then you look at this, and it's like, well, now everything's kind of like fighting weak, because now Iron Moth's going to Terra, and it's kind of close combat comes from rude. And I kind of need a ground that isn't completely dicked over by terrain. And so then we get Gliscor. Gliscor's a good fit on this. Even though, yeah, it clicks Quake for its ground stab, it's not like its Earthquakes are stinging things anyways, and its primary use is to be getting up spikes, toxic, knockoff, U-turn, sticking around, being fat, and stalling it. So in that sense, it's like totally fine to be in terrain with a Gliscor. And then after that, picked up Terra Iron Hands, which honestly I think might be kind of redundant. It's kind of like what I've been talking about, like having 2 high tier Terras, but at the same time, Iron Hands and Iron Moth are both capable of coming to games on their own merits anyways, so it's not really that big of a knock. Blastoise is here for the obligatory spinner. It can also do funny shell smash things, but mostly it's here for that utility. Bronzong, here for utility. It's to get rocks up. It's to be a steel type. I think it's probably the best budget steel type in Paldex. Diancie is here. I would have liked to see it Terra, probably over the Iron Hands, honestly. But like, I've used non-Terra Diancie in Gen 9. It's still good. It can still do the Trick Room, Meteor Beam, Moon Blast stuff. It can do Body Press. It can do Spikes. It can do all that stuff. These last 2 picks are a little bit. Latias, in my opinion, is just not worth drafting in Palvex. It's just so bad. It gets walled by every steal in existence. So like, I don't know, like it gets Healing Wish, which is nice, which is good for like a Rillaboom trying to clean in the late game or a Moth trying to clean in the late game. Hands, Urshifu, it's good for that, but like, you can get other Healing Wish bots that do other things. Like, Latias can also just do screens, I guess. Like, it's okay, but you have other guys to do this. But if you drop the Latias, then you don't have a dragon type, and then you're stuck without with losing an extra Firewater Grass resist plus electric. Which honestly, if you look at this team isn't that weak to common electrics, because like the way I see it with electric types, it's kind of hard to be strong against them, because in Gen 9, every electric type has access to moves to hit ground types with Terra. They'll either Terra Ice, they'll Terra Flying, they'll do whatever they need to get around the checks But even without Latias around, between Gliscor and Rillaboom, they can't really pick a Terra type. Actually, no, they can just pick Ice, and then that would hit Latias too. So I guess it doesn't really change the type matchup. But still, Latias, I just think it's not very good, especially without Terra. Bastiodon without Terra, I think, is also just kind of a waste, but it's also only 10 points, so who gives a shit? Basically, the Mons we're looking at on this team are the top 8. This is an 8-Mon team. Syracuse is our official smogon of the PBO this season. Bronzong and Diancie are like the lowest tier guys you have to worry about on this team, and for those guys to be the lowest you have to worry about, that's not bad. Those are like legit solid guys. Yeah, like this is a really good team. I think overall I'd probably put, if I were to change anything, it'd be get rid of the Latias, maybe swap Terra on Iron Hands and Diancie, and then see how the points line up from there. What do you think about your own team, Syracuse?
So, being sniped in almost every pick I wanted to grab, even in free agency, I was going to do some moving around, and I got a lot of the picks in waivers grabbed before I could do it. But overall, like, at first I really hated this team when I was drafting it just because I felt so panicked. But the more I look at it, the more I appreciate like how every Mon can do a different thing. My play style has always been, especially like last season, was I want Mons that can fill roles, be team players, and be able to do different things. Be able to run defensive, be able to run offensive, do different things. That's always been my kind of play style. That way I can, surprise my opponents with, the randomness or just not expecting things, maybe bring out the, close combat, choice scarf, Incineroar to try and for very only one specific scenario. And guess what? It turns out it works out.
Not cool, man.
Very cool, man. But, my biggest complaint with this team is probably its speed tiers. It's kind of slow. 110 is the highest, and that's like tied with Iron Moth and Latias, which, by the way, trying to get something faster than 110 late in the rounds or in free agency is really difficult. Gen 9 kind of the really, really fast mons get swiped up really quickly, so it's kind of really hard to try and find those really kind of like cheap and fast mons, because most of them are already like snagged up, like Kilowattrel, Regieleki, things that are fast that can try and make that speed tier a little bit better. I definitely didn't get sniped on Noivern at some point, but not holding any grudges. But overall, that's kind of like my main complaint against my own team is kind of its speed tier. But otherwise, like I can bring a lot of different sets to try and trick my opponents and stuff. Obviously Trick Room Bronzong for some of the teams that are really, really fast. And even with like Trick Room Bronzong, then I could start doing some, funky things with like Banded Iron Hands that's suddenly going to outspeed everything in Trick Room. Even like Bastiodon maybe might come 1 or 2 weeks if a team is really that steel weak. And I don't feel like bringing Bronzong. But, and then Blastoise is supposed to be the spinner, but it also can still do funky shell smash things. Rillaboom can come in and be, more tanky with Assault Vest, or it can be, Banded, Wood Hammer, and just punch through anything that doesn't have a grass resist. Iron Moth's here to just try and, be that kind of special wall breaker that Urshifu Single Strike also is, and try and be the sweeper with the fiery dances and, tearing into ice or flying or whatever kind of can punch that hole. So I overall really like this team as I kind of look through it. I might make a few changes here and there. Latias is like originally was, I think, Sui and Gudra, but I swapped it out just because it does give me another ground immunity, because this team does kind of hurt from the ground. But having 2 levitators and a flying kind of makes up for it, plus Rillaboom. So I don't really have to worry too much about the ground types with like Diancie and Iron Hands. But overall, I do like this team. I am excited to see if I can try and punch through. I really wanted to try and use one of the Urshifus this season. I was kind of leaning towards Terra Rapid Strike, but with Single Strike still there, I was just like, you know what? Now I get to use another Terra somewhere else instead. So that was my main thing going with it. Probably maybe could have saved it to a later round, seeing how these 2 teams above me got some really strong picks later in the rounds that probably should have went in the first, but oh well. I'm excited to try and take them down and take that first spot, but we'll see how it turns out.
All right, we're gonna move on to our number 2 team, the
And now,
Tokyo Teddiursas.
and I get called the Smogon Gooner, but then you look at this team.
Yeah, that's true. This team is very standard, but also at the same time, it's a team that Kuma is very familiar with and comfortable. This guy, he used Terapagos last season, the great season. He's used Terra Greninja before. He's used Dragonite multiple times, or at least once, but I think multiple. Pretty sure he's used Jirachi too, and Moltres. Ting Lu, I'm pretty sure, is a new one. Mienshao and Sinistra, I think, also are probably new. And then Muck and Raichu may as well not exist on this team. Muck is here to make the type chart look pretty, so it doesn't just and so he has a T-Spike absorber. If you look at the rest of the team, Ting Lu's, like, in my opinion, probably the best dark. Like, you can make an Terra Greninja is like probably the strong. I think it's the most expensive. Moltres and Greninja have good Mienshao patching up team. I mean, Terapagos is also just like started out the generation kind of being like it's all right, and then these last couple Terapagos stocks have been like astronomically high. I imagine with Kuma piloting it, it'll stay that way. But yeah, I think this is another example of effectively in 8 months. I maybe the Muck will come one game. I would be shocked if Raichu ever. Sinistra's also here like as a backup. From what I was talking to him about, I was hearing about, mostly here, and it's because he just doesn't want the team relying on Dragonite and Moltres, whom are weak to very So yeah, it's a very strong team. What do you think, Syracuse?
Well, we've been talking so much about its praises, so I gotta try and knock it down a little bit. Terapagos being really the only hazard removal kind of pigeonholes it to be just boots Terapagos every week. So we might not see him bringing it some other sets. Like I know last season he did like to open with it almost every week, and he was able to get a few sweeps off with like the Calm Mind sets and some of the more sweeper sets. But I think he's definitely gonna be more pigeonholed into having it be his spinner with boots, because you got both Dragonite and Moltres that definitely don't want the rocks up. Ting Lu and Jirachi don't care too much, but definitely Dragonite definitely doesn't want to lose his multiscale. Basically, having two multiscalers, because Terapagos also has multiscale, does allow this team to take a lot more hits. Especially and with Ting Lu as well as Jirachi, you got a lot. You're able to go take a lot of hits. Plus Sinistra. Sinistra is also is very defensive. But yeah, this is an eight mon team. I would even argue almost 7, because I don't know how often he's really gonna bring Mienshao. Mienshao's kind of here just to make the speed tiers also look a little bit nicer. Same with Raichu. He might bring it a few times because fighting type is still one of the best types. But he's definitely gonna be bringing the first 5 almost every single week. I don't know, and then that 6 slots probably gonna rotate between Sinistra, Moltres, and Mienshao. Other glaring weaknesses are, he doesn't really have, a mon that wants to take a knockoff per se. It's mostly just like Ting Lu. Jirachi really doesn't want to take a knockoff at all, which a lot of times, one of your bulkier steals don't really mind it too much, but because it is super effective against Jirachi, he's not wanting to take it. Dragonite really likes having it's like Band or Berry. Same like that, so that's probably the other knock. But otherwise than that, this is, classic Kuma, really strong top heavy core mons that are gonna wipe you out. You got Terapagos you gotta worry about, even though like I said, it's probably gonna be more pigeonholed into that spinning role. It could still sweep. You got Battle Bond, Greninja, Terra, which is gonna be always in the back. You always gotta make sure you have some kind of way to stop it. Otherwise, if he can eliminate the 1 or 2 pieces that you have that stop it, he's just going to flat out win with it. And Terra Sinistra's Sinistcha is one of those mons that I feel like always gets like slept on. It's so nasty. I've used it in a lot of mocks with people I've mocked with before. And it's one of those mons that like you can do so many different things with, and if you don't have the right things to counter it, it's just gonna like wall an entire team, and you just can't do anything about it. So for that reason, Kuma lands in our second spot. The only reason he's not number one is because this last team got first round mons in the 4th and 3rd and 5th round for some reason, and I think we'll go right onto them because otherwise there's not much else we can say besides showing why Kuma's not number one with that top heavy team.
All right, before we get to this number one team, I want to justify it a little bit. Historically, the PBO drafts on vibes, not on what is necessarily optimal to pick at that point in the draft.
Yeah,
like,
just wait till Neon rankings. Just wait till we see them.
Yeah, exactly. like for example, if someone just doesn't feel like using pulp, they'll skip pulp, even if it's like pick 8 and it somehow fell to them. If they don't want it, they won't take it. And sometimes teams like this are the result of that. With that being said, if you have a weak stomach, avert your eyes. We give you our number one team, the Boston Banettes, the previous season Neon champion, looking to become the Sunset champion this season. You can look at these top 5, top 6, and just see how disgusting this is. You have Bax Glowking, the PBO trademark duo. They've won, I think, at least 2 championships together, I want to say.
Yes.
At the very least, they won Season 5 as I don't remember what the other one was. Palafin, a new addition to the PBO. It's going to be nasty on this team. You have 2 of the best priorities in the game right here. You have Terra Annihilate, one of the stronger Terra captains we allowed. Torrent T, which somehow fell to round 5. You have Sandy Shocks, which is like, it's a good ground. It's a good pivoter. It can get screens up. I think the screens will be especially important on this team. Palafin and Bax. And then every single low-tier guy left on the team are bringable and like good even. Like Tinkaton is fantastic budget roll compression, and Incineroar same deal. Cryogonal, I don't know if I've ever seen a third in people. And Chinchino is a really good backup. It's really good. This team is phenomenal. I will say though, I don't think it's without its. I think Tinkaton is like carrying the team's defensive profile on its back, which is crazy to say when there's a there. But it is the team's only fairy, and it's the team's only steal. So I ask you right now, what happens if you get a dragon type that sets up a little bit? And it's basically, if Baxcalibur is dead, which honestly it should, but if Baxcalibur is dead, or like it's Ice Shard for some reason, like, or if like if dragon that's not weak to ice, like an Archaludon or something like that, which doesn't really set up per se, but you know what I mean. Then the game is liable to just end on the spot. Like if Tinkaton doesn't come, or if it dies, or dragon types can kind of, or like if Tinkaton doesn't come, I can just bring in a Kyurem and and like, I think dragons are where this team is really going to struggle. There are a lot of dragons. There's Pulp, there's Gouging, there's the other guys we're talking about, there's like Steel Shot, Guard Shot. There are plenty of them that can conscientious when it's. I almost said short up, but I'm like, Terra Annihilate is going to be really probably going to be bulk up almost every week, and be like a non-stab Terra, unless it decides to be Scarfed and go Terra Ghost and just spam Rage Fist, because Rage Fist is a broken move that Game Freak somehow greenlit. Yeah, I think this team, is positioned to just dominate everyone this season, unless they can position their dragon types really effectively. What do you think, Syracuse?
I'm just grateful that if I did have to face them, it's week 8, so hopefully I'll already be playoff bound by then, so I won't have, I won't have my entire season ruined early on by getting crushed. This team, it hurts me because I've wanted to draft Glow King Baxcalibur for like 2 seasons in a row and just never got it. And the fact that they got it hurts me. And then like round 3, they're sitting there and they're just like, wait a second, Palafin's still on the board. And then round 4, they're like, wait a second, Annihilape's still on the board. Round 5, oh wait, Torntia is still on the board. Holy crap. It's a team that sings to my heart. Three of the mons I used last season, 4 if you count Baxcalibur's kind of the similar as Kira. So it's very similar to like my team last season. The only another glaring weakness I see though is its only way of hazard removal is like Cryogonal. So it's a 30-point mon that's kind of being forced to be brought every week.
There's
Otherwise,
also Chinchino, technically.
Chinchino, I guess, with what, Tidy Up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, lower cost mons that you don't really necessarily want to bring every week, especially when you got like that top 5. I really think Incineroar is really slept on. It's a really, really strong mon. Can do a lot of different things. Be bulky, be offensive. This team doesn't necessarily take crazy advantage of like the weather, besides obviously the Glow King Bax pair. You can run Aurora Veil Cryogonal, which would be, you know, kind of crazy, especially if you put like a light clay on it. So you could do that. Palafin's just here to be, you know, hitting things hard. Same with Annihilate. The only other like negative thing I can really think of is it is very physically offensively, and it's not a lot of special attackers. Really, all he got is like Torn T, Sandy Shocks, and maybe Cryogonal, I guess. But like it's Cryogonal. Everyone else is gonna be running physical, like Chinchino, Annihilate, Palafin, Bax, Tinkaton, Incineroar are all going to be physical. So it does kind of pigeonhole itself into being that more physically offensive threatening team. Granted, it's not really having to worry too much about like Will-O-Wisp, you know, Bax being immune, Incineroar can't be willowed. Annihilate, you can, you know, if you're letting your Annihilate getting willowed, we have to have another conversation, preferably down in Neon. But
That's crazy, bro.
but besides that, you know, besides those 2 glaring weaknesses, not having rapid, you know, a strong rapid spinner, being kind of forced to bring Cryogonal, and not really having a lot of special attackers besides Shocks and Torn T, which you're not going to want to bring special Torn T every week. It's the regen duo of Torn T and Glow King is just nasty. If you're not able to punch a hole through it, you're just not going to be able to win. Annihilate on a regen core team is insane. And then just being able to sweep with Bax and Palafin, it's just, this is not going to be a fun team to play against and set up against. You're really going to have to be locked in, and you just got to be careful, because like if you're clicking the wrong move at the wrong time, you're allowing, you know, Annihilate to get those Rage Fist builds up. You're allowing Bax to come in the snow and set up a DD. You're allowing Palafin to come in and just like punch things if you don't have any water resist. It's good, you know, and even like you said, the Terra Cincino comes in and, you know, can do nasty things as well. It's overall a really, really strong team. This is probably going to be a team that if it will probably use every single mon. If they don't end up using every single mon, I understand why, because everything is just so valued. But the fact that like those are the only glaring weaknesses I can really point out, and the fact that like I really don't want to play against this team makes me want to, you know, puts it at this #1 spot. So it's up to Raven and the Boston Banettes to pilot this team that they excellently drafted.
And with that, thank you for bearing with us, PBO. This has been the Sunset Season 8 preseason power rankings. Thank you so much.
I can't wait to be completely wrong by week 8.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm excited about it. But thank you all so much.